John, let's talk about the Obama administration's foreign policy and domestic policy. In the Wall Street Journal in June 2012, you wrote the following. Candidate Obama campaigned on narrowing presidential wartime power, closing Guantanamo Bay, trying terrorists in civilian courts, ending enhanced interrogation, and moving away from a wartime approach to terrorism toward a criminal justice approach, the opposite, obviously, of the way the Bush administration moved. You again. Mr. Obama has avoided these vexing decisions simply by depriving terrorists of all their rights by killing them, meaning drone strikes and so forth. So are you surprised by what might be called the muscular liberalism of the Obama administration's anti-terrorist policy?
There's something surprising about it, but corrosive about it at the same time.
Why?
The surprising thing is, as I was trying to suggest there, is that he basically didn't live up to any of his campaign promises in the area of national security, and in fact has to be relying on the very same constitutional and legal theories and approach to terrorism, thinking of terrorism as a war, that we did, and which they vilified us when they were out of office.
He grew in
That's
office.
Right. He grew in office. As we can only hope he grew as much as Justice Souter did on the Supreme Court. I mean, and I think that's a really striking turn, 180-degree turnaround, right? It's as if Ronald Reagan had come into office and raised taxes and increased domestic spending right after. So that's one thing. That's a surprising thing. The corrosive thing is not the constitutional legal underpinnings of it, but it's the policy choices. Because I think the policy choices of killing terrorists in the field, using drones, is actually reaping short-term benefits, but at a greater long-term cost. Because the one thing that does is that prevents us from knowing anything more about al-Qaeda. If you think about it, what the Bush administration did was to invest a lot of time and resources into developing intelligence about al-Qaeda, from electronic surveillance, from human intelligence, interrogations, Guantanamo Bay, and so on. If you look at what led us to find where Osama bin Laden was actually located for the strike last year, it came from those sources of information.
Yeah.
When you use drones, effectively, you're using down all that intelligence without replenishing it.
And is that the only or the worst cost of it? Is there a cost a larger cost to the presidential office or to the presidential function? I mean, some have compared Obama's vaunted personal involvement in choosing whom to be assassinated by drone with Zeus choosing, whom to toss his thunderbolts at. It's all on his plate, and he has a kind of power of life and death, which in a general war might be suffused throughout the executive branch's authority, but is oddly and apparently, in his mind, rightfully concentrated in his personal authority in this administration. Is that corrupting in some sense?
Well, that's actually, you don't have to go as high as Zeus. You could just go as high as a mere demigod like LBJ. Right? If you remember, LBJ would pick bombing targets in Vietnam with his advisors, and there are those famous pictures of him peering over maps, trying to decide what. And one thing about it, I do agree, it's corrosive at one level in terms of the way the executive branch works, because this is not the president's job. It's actually misuse of presidential time and energy. His job is to make decisions about the policies and let those policies be implemented by people he's appointed and put into office, but people whose job it is to figure out the military consequences, foreign policy consequences of certain targets. But the other thing that's corrosive, I think in a really unforeseen way, is what this says about our civil liberties. Because when these policies were challenged, it was said, Obama sent out his representatives to say, well, it's still okay, because even though President Obama is picking individuals to be killed by the military, they all receive due process of some kind, right?
Yes, I suggested that, like in World War II, they write on the missile due process.
Right, or at the bomb at the end of Dr. Strangelove, right?
Equal protection. Right? Yes, he had his due process, right?
And the idea of due process is you get to go to a neutral decision maker and make your case.
Exactly.
And it's the idea that the executive branch by itself, internally in secret, gives you due process.
And does it disturb you in the case of American citizens that are targeted, as we have had examples?
Oh yeah, in fact, the strange thing is that what the Obama administration did was to raise actually the level a protection for all terrorists and simultaneously reduce them for American citizens because he thinks they're all to be treated the same. I do too. I just don't think terrorists at all get due process rights when they're in the field and we're shooting missiles at them. We've never given any kind of idea of due process to enemy targets in wartime. But when the Obama administration says, no, they get due process, Anwar al-Awlaki, who's killed by a drone, an American citizen, got due process. Well, due process is not limited to American citizens. The due process clause applies to everybody. So he's saying every enemy target gets due process, right? When President Obama picks out on the list the names of people to attack, he has claimed to have been giving them due process, which means what does that mean to our due process rights here in the country? They've just been all reduced because of this claim that you don't have to be able to go to court to enforce them.
But let me get you straight on that. You're not against the drone strikes per se, which are, for the most part at least, killing terrorists, enemies of the United States, but it's the legal justification rendered for them that you object
both
to?
the idea that those are consistent with some idea of due process at all, right? It's
rather than a wartime act.
Right, yes, right, exactly, just a wartime act. But then the second thing, I think, is a policy matter. It's a bad idea because we're overusing it. We have not captured a single high-ranking al-Qaeda leader during this administration, and those people happen to be the best source of intelligence on what al-Qaeda is up to. And so, again, we have run down all the intelligence we've accumulated without replenishing it for the future.
When you heard of Obama's killing, Osama bin Laden's killing, what were your thoughts?
Well, first I thought, it's great that we found him. And I had every confidence once we found him that we could kill him if we needed to. But the thing I immediately regretted was that we didn't capture him instead. And once the details came out, and another angle of this is the administration has been leaking incredible numbers of very sensitive national security secrets into the media. But when you read about the characteristics of the operation, that there were almost no bodyguards around him, bin Laden himself wasn't armed at the time. He shot with, right in the middle of the eye, right, which only happened when there was no resistance being put. Right, he could have easily been captured and taken out. Think about how much intelligence we could have gotten. That might have enabled us to really roll up al-Qaeda in one fell swoop at the end because of all the intelligence we could have gotten. I worry that this administration is so ideologically wrapped up to a certain point of view on closing Guantanamo and trying to make everything more like a civilian process, which isn't capable of handling terrorist leaders like bin Laden. They would just rather avoid all those hard questions and shoot bin Laden instead.
Shoot now, ask questions later.
Exactly.
Except there's no one to ask questions of.
Right.